Every year around Easter, two groups of people start fighting on the internet. One side says Easter was stolen from paganism, that Christians ripped off ancient fertility goddesses and do not even know it. The other side says that is completely made up, that Easter is 100% Christian, and anyone who says otherwise is either lying or trying to tear down the faith. Here's the truth. Both sides are wrong, and the real history is actually way more interesting than either argument. Let us start with the word Easter itself. The word Easter does not appear anywhere in the Bible. Most of the world actually uses a completely different name for this holiday, a name that comes directly from the Hebrew word for Passover. And that connection to Passover is not accidental. Jesus was crucified during Passover week, and the early church saw him as the new Passover lamb. That is the theological foundation of the holiday, and it has nothing to do with paganism. A monk named Bede wrote in 725 AD that Anglo-Saxon people had named the month of April after a goddess called Eostre, and when Christians started celebrating the resurrection during that month, the English name stuck. That is it. One monk, one paragraph, written almost 700 years after Jesus died. So when people confidently post online that Easter was stolen from a pagan goddess, they are basing that entire claim on one paragraph written by a Christian monk over 1,000 years ago. But it does get more complicated. Just because the evidence for Eostre is thin does not mean the story ends there. Archaeologists have found over 150 ancient stone inscriptions in Germany dedicated to goddesses with names very similar to Eostre. These inscriptions date back to the 2nd century AD, so some version of a dawn goddess with a similar name probably did exist across Germanic regions. Back in 595 AD, the Pope sent missionaries to England with a very specific instruction. He told them to allow existing pagan festivals to keep their outward forms, but to replace the meaning with Christian teaching wherever possible. The Pope literally told missionaries to take pagan seasonal celebrations and Christianize them. This was not a secret and not a conspiracy. It was just a practical strategy for reaching people who were deeply attached to their existing traditions. So did the early church deliberately absorb some pagan spring festival elements into Easter in certain regions? Probably yes. Is the resurrection itself a pagan idea? Absolutely not. Now let us talk about the Ishtar claim. If you have been on the internet around Easter, you have probably seen the meme saying, Easter comes from Ishtar, who was an ancient Babylonian goddess of fertility and war. There is no credible historical evidence for this connection. None. Most of this Ishtar theory can actually be traced back to one man. A Victorian-era minister named Alexander Hislop wrote a book in the 1800s claiming that all Catholic traditions had pagan origins. Historians have completely rejected his work as inaccurate and driven by personal bias. But his ideas spread through popular culture and eventually became the confident memes millions of people share every year as established fact. They are not established fact. They are thoroughly debunked. So what about Easter eggs and the Easter bunny? The earliest written record of an Easter hare delivering eggs shows up in Germany in 1572. A physician named Gork von Frankenau also wrote about it in 1682. That is not ancient. That is not pagan mythology. That is early modern Germany. The eggs have a simpler explanation. Early Christians were not allowed to eat eggs during Lent, which is the 40 days before Easter. By the time Easter arrived, they had weeks' worth of eggs saved up. Decorating and giving away those eggs became a natural part of the celebration. The original Easter hare called the Osterhase was not just a fun character for kids. It actually played the role of a judge, deciding whether children had been good or bad at the start of Easter season. Think of it like a spring version of Santa Claus. German immigrants brought this tradition to America in the 1700s, settling in Pennsylvania. Their children made nests for the hare to fill with colored eggs. Over time, the nests became baskets, the eggs became chocolate, and the hare became the Easter bunny. A German scholar named Jacob Grimm, the same Grimm from the fairy tales, suggested in 1835 that hares were once sacred to the goddess Eostre. That idea got picked up by other writers, and eventually a BBC documentary in 1993 presented it as established fact. It is not. It is a theory built on top of another theory. The honest answer is that rabbits show up in spring folklore across many cultures because they breed constantly and visibly. They were given as offerings around the spring equinox in ancient times and became mascots of the season long before Easter existed. That tradition has a completely practical Christian origin. Are there also old pre-Christian associations between eggs and spring fertility? Yes. That does not mean the Easter bunny was stolen from paganism. It just means spring, rabbits, and new life have always gone together in the human imagination. Here is what the evidence actually supports. The resurrection of Jesus is the oldest and most well-documented part of Easter. Early Christian writings connect Easter directly to Passover and frame Jesus as the new Passover lamb. That is the core of the holiday, and it has nothing to do with paganism. The English name Easter probably does come from an Anglo-Saxon month name that may have been connected to a spring goddess. But most of the world does not even use that name. Some traditions, like decorated eggs, were absorbed from existing seasonal customs as Christianity spread into new regions. The Ishtar connection has no historical basis and was invented by a discredited Victorian minister. So why does any of this matter? People use the messy history of Easter to make a bigger argument. They say if the holiday absorbed pagan elements, then Christianity itself is just recycled mythology. If the bunny came from German folklore, then the whole thing is made up. That logic does not hold up. Think about it this way. The English language borrows words from Latin, French, Norse, and German. That does not mean English is fake. It means it developed over time through contact with other cultures. Christianity spread through a world that already had religions, seasons, symbols, and traditions. Some of those things left marks on how certain celebrations look today. The church sometimes encouraged that deliberately. But none of that actually touches what Easter is really about. Because when you cut through all the noise, the arguments about goddess names, the debates about bunnies and eggs, and who borrowed what from who, you end up at one thing. One moment, a tomb that was supposed to be sealed shut, guarded, done, and then it wasn't. Even the people who wanted Jesus gone, who had everything to gain from just pointing at a grave and saying, "See, he's still in there," they couldn't do it. The best story they came up with was that his friends stole the body. A group of scared fishermen somehow outmaneuvered Roman guards and pulled off the most consequential cover-up in history. That's what they went with. And here we are, 2,000 years later, still talking about it. So yeah, maybe the word Easter has some old Germanic roots. Maybe the bunny came over on a boat from Germany a few hundred years ago. None of that shakes the foundation of what believers have been standing on since the very beginning. The resurrection is not a tradition that got added over time. It was the whole point from day one. That's what this day is, and honestly, no internet argument about paganism has ever come close to touching that.